Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We're going to begin with a crowd singing some very powerful music. In Chile, masses of people have taken to the street demanding the fall of their government. Some of the manifestations are 1 million people or more. The government hasn't fallen yet, but it has canceled an important international conference that was supposed to take place in Chile. They are feeling the heat. In the streets, people feel confident enough to sing the songs of Victor Jara, a revolutionary who died shortly after the September 11, 1973 fascist coup. The crowd will be singing El Derecho a Vivir en Paz, the right to live in peace. Note at the end, scores of people hold up guitars and chant El Pueblo Unido Jamás será vencido. A united people will not be defeated. This was projected on the side of a building in Santiago, Chile. We will not return to normalcy because normalcy was the problem. In Lebanon and Iraq, there were also huge protests against the elites and their corruption. The vicious reaction in Iraq led to the deaths of 250 people. In Lebanon, the reactionary Hezbollah tried to drive the people off the streets using violence. The people left, but returned a few hours later. On October 30th, Lebanon's prime minister resigned. Now some video from Lebanon protests. The U.S. stock market is at a record high, and the corporate press tells us that the economy is sound. It's a lie. What we're doing is not sustainable. The corporations act as if the atmosphere was an open garbage can of infinite size. Every reputable scientist says we're going to pay for this, and soon. The New York Times this week highlighted a report from Climate Central, which said that previous studies had underestimated the danger of rising sea levels. The measurements of water and rising sea levels have been accurate, but they say they have better data now from satellites because they corrected for what was happening. The satellites were assuming the tops of trees was the height of the land. As a result, 3 times as much land will be below sea level in just 30 years. Here's a picture of Vietnam. On the left, the old estimate. On the right, the new. Virtually the whole country. Now, they can try to build walls. Part of Holland is below sea level, and dikes keep out the salt water. But the Vietnamese coast is vastly larger. And what's true for Vietnam is true for Shanghai and other immense coastal cities. This is no joke. Indonesia right now is moving its capital city. Jakarta is being submerged by water. Watch this segment about it from Democracy Now!
I want to ask you about Indonesia announcing plans to relocate its capital. The capital city is Jakarta. It is going to relocate to the island of Borneo. Jakarta, which is home to over 30 million people, has been steadily sinking into the Java Sea. A study found over a quarter of Jakarta will be underwater within the next 10 years. Excessive extraction of groundwater, poorly managed environmental policies have led to Jakarta's surface water becoming polluted and unfit for consumption. Rising sea levels from climate change further compound the issue. This is the Indonesian president, Joko Widodo, announcing the plans.
The place has a minimum risk of natural disasters, such as floods, earthquakes, tsunami, forest fires, volcanoes, and landslides. Secondly, the location is strategic, as it's located in the center of Indonesia. And thirdly, it's close to the other developed cities.
It's not clear what will happen to the millions of Jakarta residents at risk of losing their homes and livelihoods as Jakarta is submerged in the coming years. But I want to ask each of you this question, starting with Harjit Singh.
See, everything points to the unsustainable development model that we have created that continues to exploit nature, whether it's about extraction of water at unsustainable levels and the man-made crisis called climate change that we have caused. I think we need to look at how we look at how we treat development. What is our definition of development, and who is causing that destruction? Some of these fundamental questions we need to ask are the whole orientation towards GDP growth and completely ignoring what we are doing to environment has to change. Environment now has to be at the center of everything that we are doing, how we are using our natural resources, how we are building our homes, how we are using water. All that has to change. And that thinking is not yet there despite some of these challenges that we are seeing, and look at the kind of actions we are now forced to take. But our political leaders are still stuck with that thinking that corporations are going to solve the problem, and we are seeing privatization and not really rebooting the development model that we have created, which is responsible for all the crises that we are facing in this world today.
And Ben Strauss.
Yes, well, I think we have to look at Jakarta and really use it to understand we could all be Jakarta tomorrow. Unfortunately, it's a model for what could happen to many other coastal cities. Or we could look at New Orleans, which has more resources and has built a levee system to protect itself. But when a hurricane comes, we saw the tragedy that can take place when you live in the bottom of a bowl and the defenses fail.
The Tree of Life Education Fund, which is connected to the First Congregational Church of Old Lyme, brings people to Palestine to see what life is like there firsthand, and has excellent programs about Palestine in the United States. What follows is a speech by Cindy Corrie at a Tree of Life presentation in Hartford. Cindy Corrie is the mother of Rachel Corrie from Washington State, who was murdered by Israeli soldiers as she tried to protect the home of a Palestinian from demolition.
Please welcome Cindy and Craig Corrie.
Thank you for such a warm welcome and for this amazing program. It's wonderful to be a part. My daughter, Rachel Corrie, was the youngest of our 3 children. She was born in 1979, nearly 12 years after the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and the Shabbat Farms by Israel, and over 30 years after the dispossession of the Palestinian people during the Nakba. Our family knew no Palestinians at the time, not in Olympia, Washington, where we live, nor anywhere else in the world. Nor could we have imagined how the Palestinian people would one day become a part of Rachel's life and our own. As a child, Rachel had dreams. She was an adventurer. When she was just over 2 years of age, enjoying an afternoon at a playground while her grandmother watched, she ambled from the wooden climbers towards Capitol Lake. Drawing from her memory words from a Sesame Street book that she and I had read together, she raised her arms toward the lake and proclaimed, "This is the wide world and I'm coming to it." Rachel was an observer in our family, and always a reader, a writer, an artist, someone compelled to create. When her father's colleague at work asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she responded, "I am a poet." She loved Seattle and our Northwest mountains, forests, and sea. And as a college student, she wrote, You can live here for years and believe you understand, and yet not understand what it is you are living in. I'm glad I know about the people who lived on Eld Inlet. I'm glad I know about the internment of Nisqually people on Fox Island. We're traditionally presented with history as a thing that happened somewhere else, certainly nothing to intervene in. Studying the history of this area roots me. It makes me more conscious of the land and more conscious of myself and of the people around me as actors in history. We certainly waded in the same water and wandered on the same beaches as very brave people. It makes bravery seem more possible. After 9/11, Rachel became deeply involved with several Olympia peace groups. She opposed the Iraq War and led an effort to create a human flock of doves for Olympia's Earth Day tribute to honor all of life, the procession of the species. She celebrated after, and she wrote, "I've danced down the street with 40 people from the ages of 7 to 70 dressed as doves. The procession is a value statement. I'm happy to see a peace message included in that. It's important for people who oppose war and repression to speak about who we are as a community, in addition to speaking about war and racism and injustice. We are not outside. It's important that human rights and resistance to oppression be included in the way we define ourselves as a community." Rachel was drawn to the issue of Palestine after 9/11, when she met with those in our community who had strong connections to this issue. She read, she learned, and she studied Arabic. And early in 2003, she traveled to Israel, the West Bank, and finally to Gaza. In her journal, she wrote, "Why do I want to go? I've been organizing in Olympia for a little over a year on anti-war global justice issues, and at some point it started to feel like this work is missing a solid connection to the people who are most immediately impacted by US foreign policy. I've had this underlying need to go to a place and meet people who are on the other end of the portion of my tax money that goes to fund the US and other militaries." With other international activists, Rachel lived with and built relationships with Palestinian families in Rafah, along the Gaza-Egypt border, whose homes were at risk of demolition by the Israeli military and who welcomed international solidarity. She slept at water wells to protect them from demolition, worked with children's and women's groups and Gaza human rights organizations, and planned for connections with counterparts in Olympia through a sister city project. She wrote at a small internet cafe into the wee hours of the mornings to get stories out to her family, friends, and the international media. With other international activists, Rachel engaged in nonviolent, direct action to support families whose homes were threatened with demolition. And on March 16, 2003, as she stood to prevent the demolition of a Palestinian family's home, she was run over and killed beneath a US-built and funded Caterpillar D9R armored bulldozer operated by 2 Israeli soldiers. At the time of Rachel's death, our family was comforted, sustained, inspired, and mentored by the human solidarity we experienced from people around the world. Solidarity that after 16 years continues from Palestinians and from many others. In 2003, a woman in Israel wrote to her friend in Olympia, who passed this message on to me. We need all our young people, ours and theirs. A woman in New York State wrote, "My grandparents fled the pogroms of Russia 100 years ago, and spent decades working for the creation of a Jewish homeland. I'm certain that if they were alive, they would weep for all that is happening there now, as I do. And a gentleman in the Middle East wrote, I write to you as a parent myself, and also as a Muslim who believes passionately in the freedom and dignity of every individual on our earth. It seems to me that we too carelessly forget or disbelieve our shared identity across all times and cultures, when in fact we are one human family, desperately in need of peacemakers. What have I learned about solidarity from my daughter and from Craig's and my own experience these past 16 years? And what is key for us all to remember as we move forward together in solidarity with Palestinians and with all who are oppressed? Rachel chose to Gaza with a Palestinian-led movement, the International Solidarity Movement, ISM, committed to resisting the entrenched, systematic oppression and dispossession of the Palestinian population. I have learned in our work that we must elevate and prioritize Palestinian voices and the voices of those who live with the injustices. They must always be a part of our discourse, and I'm thrilled that they have been tonight. Rachel saw connections between issues. From Gaza, she wrote, what we are paying for here is truly evil, the largest evil I have witnessed directly. Maybe the general growing class imbalance in the world and consequent devastation of working people's lives all over the world is a bigger evil. Maybe being here should make me more aware of what it might mean to be a farmer in Colombia right now. 16 years later, Craig and I talk about the intersections between issues, the need to include in our discussions those who work on indigenous rights, on opposing racism, on disproportionate police violence against people of color and incarceration, on the treatment of human beings at our borders, and more. A Palestinian colleague said in a recent U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights webinar that simply showing up for those who work on these related issues is doing Palestine solidarity work. The Palestinian struggle must now be one for universal human rights. Rachel wrote, "What is privilege? It is the thing that is uncomfortable to say. Your secret kinship with Sam Walton. Any advantage you enjoy based on your position in a society. Anything unearned, arbitrary. What is white skin privilege? White skin privilege is the giant iceberg looming beneath the tip that is security checks at the airport." 16 years later, those of us who have lived privileged lives and have benefited from racial, ethnic, economic, or other privilege know that we have much listening, learning, and self-examination to do. We must be on guard, watching for how our own internalized privilege makes way for hierarchies and confiscation of power. As we do this necessary work, we humbly ask for guidance and some forgiveness, because there is need in this movement for all of us. Rachel wrote, "I look forward to all of us who are new at this, developing better skills for working in democratic structures and healing our own racism and classism and sexism and heterosexism and ageism and ableism, and becoming more effective." Rachel valued commitments and said, "I continue to believe that my home, Olympia, could gain a lot and offer a lot by deciding to make a commitment to Rafa in the form of a sister community relationship. Many people want their voices to be heard, and I think we need to use some of our privilege as internationals to get those voices heard directly in the U.S., rather than through the filter of well-meaning internationals such as myself. Solidarity calls for commitment. Rachel's was to Gaza and to its children, both of which cry out to us for further attention. In Rachel's journal, one of her many lists is titled Identifying Baby Steps, followed by a string of small to-do items that would eventually make her trip to Palestine a reality. I have learned that the baby steps, yours and mine and those of all the others across this country who work with us for change, are cumulative, and they are making a difference. We are changing the discourse on the issue of Palestine here in the United States and are elevating discussion of all the related social justice issues that must be addressed as we work for a more gentle and just country and world. Martin Luther King wrote, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." In Gaza, Rachel wrote, "This has to stop. I think it is a good idea for us all to drop everything and devote our lives to making this stop. I don't think it's an extremist thing to do anymore. I still really want to dance around to Pat Benatar and have boyfriends and make comics for my coworkers. But I also want this to stop." So you and I, we have our marching orders. Their work and ours goes on. Thank you.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.